Joining us tonight is our Press TV correspondent from Washington, D.C., Colin Campbell, and also joining us is from Montreal, Arnold August, author and journalist. Thanks very much to the both of you gentlemen for joining our news review program this hour. Starting with you, Colin, please tell us about the situation with the United States and its support of Ukraine. The United States keeps pumping more weapons into Ukraine. What does it gain from the ongoing protracted war?
Yeah, and we have to keep in mind this is already in addition to the $13 billion that the U.S. has already pledged to Ukraine. The Ukraine is a source of great attention for the United States, mainly because of its conflict with Russia. And what it's trying to do is assert dominance in that region over Russia right now. And of course, Russia's pushing back on this, and it becomes almost like a proxy war between the two countries. Obviously more direct for Russia than it is the United States. But what they want to do is create this barrier and show that they are going to keep their presence in this region despite whatever Russia wants the U.S. to do, or however Russia or Vladimir Putin has envisioned this area to look in a new empire or a new area of control. The U.S. wants to push back against that. Currently, what the military are doing right now is trying to develop a strategy, a medium and long-term strategy, in order to support Ukraine even after this war has ended. So this is not going to be a short-term fix or attachment between the U.S. and Ukraine. This is going to be something that the U.S. is planning to be embroiled in for quite some time.
Okay, so Arnold, like we just heard Colin say, this is a long-term plan for the United States. The protracted war is taking its toll on Europe. So how worse can it get as we approach colder days of autumn and winter, and how can it affect the economy in Europe?
Well, it can get worse today because the millions of people in Europe are in the streets taking a very courageous stand against the U.S. NATO narrative with regards to Ukraine, with regards to Russia, and taking a stand also to not sanction Russia, so the Russians will not, Russian gas and other products for people, keeping people warm and able to cook in the winter, would be able to resume something that was, of course, largely stopped after the conflict took place. I mean, one thing that is so amazing, you mentioned the heads, in Europe, you had Blinken going to Kiev, you had the Secretary of Defense going to Germany, but also accompanying them were the heads of the main military industries in the United States. And from what I read in this report, it also indicates that the United States not only is sending weapons to Ukraine, but they are, by doing so, they appear to be also in competition to European arms dealers. So this is, spiraling out of control. Like one thing I have to ask, living in a capitalist country, what happened, many years ago when the liberals were so enthusiastic in opposing the industrial military complex in the United States, right? Well, what is happening now in 2022, it is by far the most obvious confirmation that the military-industrial complex is deeply involved in this war. It's so obvious. United States sends money to the military industries, and the military industries send them off to Europe. So I think that it also, this obvious escalation today, whether the West or the US or Canada likes it or not, it actually confirms that Russia's very deep apprehension going back many years, as your correspondent in the United States just said, going back many years regarding European and US intentions to destroy Russia. So it's a confirmation, and people around the world who are looking for, everyone wants a peaceful solution, I agree. But the only real way to support a peaceful resolution is to say, okay, we support the Russian special military operation because it is getting rid of the Nazis in Ukraine. And if Ukraine wants to save itself, the Ukrainian people wants to save itself from this, and the people in those 18 countries, also want to save themselves from a very disastrous economic and social situation, they have to negotiate with Russia, taking into account Russia's needs and Russia's very important security concerns, which has been laid out by Russia many years ago, but Ukraine refused to deal with it. And we know now, this came out a few days ago, that there was actually going to have a peace discussion take place between Zelensky and the Russian government, but Boris Johnson flew to Ukraine and scuttled that whole thing. So we want peace, yes. The peace has to be on the basis of the Russian demands for their security and taking into account the needs of the Ukrainian people. They're not, how are the Ukrainians in any way benefiting from this war? They're being, killed and maimed and all that. There are so many issues there, and immigration. So we have to support peace by saying, give in to at least deliberate a negotiated peace on the basis of the Russian concerns that have been the same over many years.
Okay, Arnold, I hear you there. I'm going to go over to Colin to clarify what Arnold just said, was that a negotiation or diplomatic solution would be the best way to take things forward. And of course, Europe and Ukraine could benefit from a diplomatic solution, but what's stopping it?
Well, you have the neoliberal interests that are creating this boundary to create a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. You have Ukraine that has its own interests, that wants total sovereignty and total autonomy, and really doesn't want its boundaries to be infringed upon, which with Russia right on the outside there, still trying to make incursions into the country, the Ukraine is trying to push back on that. The U.S. is showing its support for Ukraine, and that is, again, creating a lot of money for business interests on the side. So the longer this war goes on, the more that you have companies in the U.S. that are benefiting from it. Ukraine wants to keep its boundaries, and then you have Russia with its own interests saying that it wants to reshape Ukraine or take over Ukraine. So you have all of these conflicting outcomes that each side wants, and that's why you're seeing this war continue. Now, this is something that could have been avoided months ago when Putin alluded that was going to be a conflict of interest. But the Biden administration really didn't take it as seriously or felt that this would be a better outcome to have this war specifically, and to keep Russia outside of intruding on Ukraine. Obviously, that's not going to be a peaceful resolution, but there are interests that stand to benefit from this. The more interests that benefit from this on the side is the longer we're going to see this protracted. I really don't think that Putin is going to stand down at this point. We still see a lot of defiance coming from Ukraine. There would have to be some solid and tangible resolutions as to how the reshaping of these countries would look, and if both sides would agree to that. And right now, it doesn't seem like either side will agree on any of the modifications that are potentially going to happen or that have happened so far.
I see. So, Arnold, going back to you, to conclude, the US claims to be an ally of Ukraine, when in fact it's Ukraine's infrastructure, economy, and people who are being sacrificed for the US's motives. So what kind of an ally is the US to the Ukrainian people?
Well, not with the Ukrainian people, definitely an ally of Zelensky. And he has been put there as sort of the proxy leader of this war against Russia. And the Ukrainian people have nothing to win by giving in to Zelensky's position of being simply a mouthpiece and interest of U.S. military and political influence in the area. I mean, it's really a question of, I think the issue of, it has been a war of arms, etc., since February, agreed. But it also has been an important war of ideas. And in the West, we have to keep on refusing to give any credibility at all to the US, Canada, NATO narrative that the problem is Russian invasion. The problem is rather that Ukraine and the United States have been provoking this a lot for quite many years now in order to weaken Russia as part of the growing alliance of Russia, China, Iran, and other countries against US world domination. You know, they are fighting, US and its allies are fighting against the emerging multipolar world.
Very well. Thank you very much to the both of you gentlemen for your very well-informed insights. Colin Campbell there, Press TV correspondent, joining us from Washington, and Arnold August, author and journalist from Montreal. Thanks to the both of you gentlemen for sharing your insights. I really appreciate it. And on that note, we've come to the end of our news review program.